Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be cracking open this pretty fascinating world of statutory interpretation,
Oh, yeah.
which is basically how we figure out what laws really mean, specifically in South Africa, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
You'd think it'd be straightforward, you know?
You would, wouldn't you?
Just the words on the page, but
Yeah.
that's not really the case, is it?
No, not at all. And that's what's so interesting about this. We've got a study guide here and a textbook that we're going to be pulling from.
Yeah, let's deep dive into it.
Deep dive, yeah.
All right.
So one of the first things that we need to tackle is this idea that interpreting legislation is like a simple step-by-step process.
Right.
Which a lot of students think.
Yeah, like a recipe, right?
Exactly, yeah, a recipe. And our study guide actually debunks that myth right away and emphasizes that we need to look at it holistically,
Okay.
thinking about the context, the history, even social and political factors.
So it's not just like what the law says right now, but like all of the things surrounding the law?
Exactly.
Sure.
So this first unit is really important because it lays the groundwork for all of the other units.
It's like the foundation.
Exactly, the foundation for understanding legislation. And the study guide emphasizes that each chapter has specific learning outcomes.
Oh, okay.
So it tells you what you're meant to grab at the end of each chapter.
Well, that's handy. Okay. But we know if we've got it or not.
Exactly. So jumping into the first chapter then, we'll start with defining legislation. What is legislation?
Right.
And the chapter really emphasizes that we need to distinguish legislation from other types of laws, like common law and custom,
Okay.
because specific rules of interpretation actually only apply to legislation.
So we can't just treat all law the same.
No.
Okay.
And it points us to the Interpretation Act of 1957
Okay.
as the key source for how we go about defining and interpreting legislation in South Africa.
Okay. So that's like the rule book
Exactly.
for legislation.
And then it goes on to this idea of enacted law text.
Enacted law text.
Yeah, so it provides practical examples from South African law, like regulations under the Municipal Electoral Act,
Okay.
to illustrate different types of legislation.
Okay. So it's not all just like one type.
Exactly.
Right.
It also goes on to look at the life cycle of legislation.
The life cycle, like from beginning to end.
Yeah, from beginning to end. So how it's adopted, promulgated,
Okay.
commenced, amended.
It can be amended.
Yeah,
We're-
repealed and even invalidated.
Wait, so repealed and invalidated, what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually a really important distinction that the study guide wants us to grasp.
Okay.
Repealing a law means removing it from the books completely. It's gone.
Like hitting delete.
Exactly, hitting delete. Invalidation, however, happens when a court declares a law unconstitutional.
So it's still there, but it's just not really
Yeah, it's like a defanged lion. It's not
powerless.
powerless, exactly, yeah. And the study guide gives us some examples of this.
Okay, like what?
So, for example, the Terrorism Act of 1967,
Okay.
which was deemed to have come into operation 5 years before it was even adopted.
Whoa, that's crazy.
So that just shows you, like, the kind of things that can happen.
Wild.
It also talks about this pharmaceuticals fiasco, which illustrates the importance of Section 14 of the Interpretation Act
Okay.
and subordinate legislation.
So that section is important.
It is, yeah. And then it goes on to talk about this example from a constitutional court case.
Okay.
Where the death penalty was declared unconstitutional,
Okay.
but they couldn't repeal it.
So that's the difference then.
Exactly.
Between being repealed and invalidated.
Precisely.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And then the study guide moves on to look at the structure of legislation, the hierarchical structure.
Okay.
So in South Africa, we have the Constitution at the top,
Top's right.
then original legislation, and then subordinate legislation.
Subordinate.
So
Okay.
it uses this example of exhumation and reburial.
What?
Yeah,
Okay.
to kind of show how complex the interplay of all this legislation is.
Okay, so like if I wanted to, I don't know, dig up
Dig up.
some remains.
Yeah, exhume them.
Exhume them.
You would need permission from the provincial government. But then the reburial falls under the jurisdiction of the municipality where the reburial is taking place.
Oh, okay.
And then if you need to transport the remains across provincial lines,
Yeah.
you might encounter regulations at the national and provincial level.
Oh, wow.
So you've got all these different laws interacting.
It's complicated.
Very quickly, yeah.
Wow, okay.
And then the study guide wants to emphasize this shift from a very text-based approach
Okay.
to a more holistic contextual
A
approach.
text? Yeah, okay.
Particularly after the Constitution was adopted in '96. So it talks about textualism versus contextualism.
Okay, those are big words.
Yeah, basically two different schools of thought.
So like two different ways of looking at the law.
Exactly. So textualism focuses on the literal meaning of the words.
Just the word
just the words. Whereas contextualism argues that we need to understand the purpose and the context surrounding the legislation.
Okay.
So it's not just about the black letter of the law, it's about understanding what was happening in society,
Okay.
what problem it was trying to solve.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
then the study guide emphasizes the profound impact of the Constitution
Wait, the Constitution,
on this debate.
because it's like the supreme law.
Exactly.
Everything kind of,
It's the guiding light for how we interpret legislation.
okay, so even if it's written one way, if it goes against the Constitution, it's
Yeah, it's got to be interpreted in line with the Constitution.
interesting.
And it's going to guide us through some key judgments
Oh, cool.
that have shaped this approach. And it also talks about some very interesting theories,
Oh, okay.
like critical legal studies and deconstructionism.
Okay, we'll have to come back to that, I think.
We will.
Yeah, we'll need a whole other deep dive for that one.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that's, I feel like we've already covered so much.
We have.
This is just the beginning, though,
This is just the beginning, yeah.
of statutory interpretation.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Let's take a break.
yeah, let's have a breather, and we'll come back and we'll get into some more of the nitty-gritty
Sounds good.
of the practical tools and techniques.
All right.
Cool. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into statutory interpretation, and I feel like we've already laid the foundation.
the groundwork.
The groundwork, yeah.
Yeah.
We know what legislation is. We know
A life cycle.
it's got a whole life.
It does.
It's got a birth and a death, potentially.
Yeah, it's a dramatic life.
And now we're going to get into, how do we actually do this?
yeah.
How do we interpret
the practical stuff.
the practical stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
So the study guide here actually gives us a whole bunch of interpretive tools
oh, cool.
that can help us unlock the
But they-
legislation.
Like a toolbox.
It's a toolbox. Yeah, exactly. So we'll start with the internal aids.
Internal aids, what's that?
So those are things that we find within the legislation itself.
Okay.
So the long title, headings, punctuations, schedules, definitions.
Okay, so you start inside the document.
Yeah, you start inside before you even venture outside.
Okay.
The study guide really emphasizes the long title
Okay.
because it gives you a really concise overview of the act's purpose,
Okay, that makes sense.
and the headings can help us understand how it's structured.
Right, like the different sections and all of that.
Exactly. And then even punctuation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like a comma can change the meaning.
Okay, that's scary.
It can be, and definitions, obviously.
Okay, yeah, that's important. What do they actually mean by that word?
Exactly,
What-
because words can have different meanings in different contexts, so
Right.
we need to be sure we're using the right meaning within the context of this specific law.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And schedules, which often contain detailed information, tables, lists, all of that.
Oh, okay, so it's not just extra stuff at the end.
No, it's important.
Okay.
So all of these internal aids
Right.
can really help us
Yeah.
unlock the legislation and understand what it's about.
Okay, so that's all internal.
All internal.
Now, what about external aids?
Yeah, so
Stuff outside of the actual document itself.
outside of the document itself that can help us
Okay.
dictionaries, obviously.
sure.
Yeah. To define words, other legislation, which
Okay.
can be really helpful because it can provide definitions, precedents.
Oh, okay, so how a similar law was interpreted.
Exactly, yeah. Commission report.
Commission reports.
Yeah, so, these commitments,
Okay.
they do in-depth analysis and provide recommendations.
Okay.
And then parliamentary debates.
Parliamentary debates.
Yeah, which can be really interesting because it gives you an insight into what the lawmakers were thinking.
Oh, so you can see the discussions.
The discussions they had, yeah.
Wow, okay.
So by considering all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to build up
A better picture.
a better picture, yeah,
Okay.
of the meaning of the legislation.
Okay, cool.
The study guide also talks about common law presumptions.
Presumptions, what are those?
So these are assumptions that courts make about the intention of the legislature,
Okay.
especially when the meaning of the law isn't clear.
Okay, so they kind of fill in the gaps.
They do, yeah.
Okay.
So one of those is the presumption against futility,
Okay.
which means that we don't interpret a law
Okay.
to make it useless.
Right, it has to have the purpose.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we have the presumption against retrospectivity.
Retrospective.
So the idea that the law shouldn't apply to things that happened before it was enacted.
Right, okay, so you have to be punishing something that...
That wasn't illegal at the time.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
And the study guide provides all sorts of examples
Oh, cool.
of how these presumptions have been applied on case law.
Okay, awesome.
And then we come to interpretive rules.
Ooh, more rules.
More rules, yeah. So
This is getting complex.
it is, but these are really helpful for decoding legal language.
Okay.
So one of the best known ones is the mischief rule.
The mischief rule.
Yeah, so this looks at the problem the law was trying to solve.
Oh, so what was the mischief they were trying?
Exactly. So you don't just look at the words, you look at what was happening in society.
The context.
The context, exactly. And then we have the dum generis rule.
Say that again?
Ius dum generis.
Ius dum generis.
It's a mouthful, yeah.
Okay, and what does that one do?
So this helps interpret lists of words by looking at their common characteristics.
Okay, so like if a law says, I don't know, cars, trucks, motorcycles, and other vehicles, would a bicycle be included?
Exactly. That's what this rule helps us figure out.
Okay.
So the study guide provides lots of examples of these rules being used in case law as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's not just theory, it's practical stuff.
Right.
And then this wouldn't be a guide to statutory interpretation.
Right.
If it didn't talk about peremptory versus directory provisions.
Oh, okay, this sounds...
Yeah, so this is all about whether a provision is mandatory or optional.
Right, okay, so like some are hard and fast rules and some are just like guidelines.
Yeah, so peremptory provisions, you have to comply with those.
Strictly.
Strictly, yeah.
Okay.
Directory provisions, you have a bit more leeway.
Yeah.
So the study guide gives us some guidelines for figuring out...
Okay, like what are the clues?
Yeah, so one of the big clues is the language used.
Okay, so like what words?
Yeah, so words like shall or must usually indicate that it's peremptory.
Like you gotta do it.
You gotta do it, yeah. Words like may or should suggest it's more directory.
Okay, so it's like a suggestion.
Yeah, more of a suggestion.
Okay.
We also need to look at the purpose of the provision.
Okay.
So if it's trying to protect a fundamental, right, or prevent some serious harm, then it's probably going to be peremptory.
Right, because it's important.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And it gives us a great case laws example.
Oh, what is it?
Messenger of the Magistrates Court, Durbin v. Pillay.
Okay.
So in this case, the court had to decide whether a provision that required a document to be sent by registered post.
Registered post.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was peremptory or directory?
So, like, how strictly?
Yeah, how strictly should we interpret this?
Okay.
And the court said it was peremptory.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they said if you don't send it by registered post, that action's invalid.
Wow, so something as simple as...
how you send the letter.
Can invalid...
Wow, okay, the whole thing.
That's intense.
It is. Okay,
so
this section equips us with all of this knowledge and the skills we need to apply it.
Okay.
So we can navigate this legal landscape a bit more confidently.
Okay, so I feel like we're building, like, a really strong foundation.
Yeah.
For understanding and interpreting.
And we're not done yet.
Oh, there's more.
There's more, yeah. The study guide takes us to the heart of constitutional interpretation.
Okay, this sounds, like, really exciting.
It is, yeah. This is where it all comes together.
All right, lead the way. I'm ready.
Let's go.
Okay, so we are back, and I feel like we have climbed a mountain.
Yeah, we have, haven't we?
Of knowledge of
statutory interpretation.
Of statutory interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
And now we are at the summit, like you said.
The peak.
The peak.
Yeah.
Which is constitutional interpretation.
That's right, yeah.
So, I think it's safe to say that we both agree that the Constitution is pretty important.
Yeah, it's kind of the bedrock of everything.
Yeah, it's like the most important law.
Supreme law, yes.
Supreme, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that play into all of this?
Well, the study guide really emphasizes the Bill of Rights.
Okay, the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, which is part of the Constitution.
Right.
And it guarantees fundamental rights to everyone.
To everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all legislation
has
to be measured against this benchmark.
So even if, like, a law
if the word
seems to say something that, is unfair or...
Yeah, if it infringes on those fundamental rights, then...
Yeah, it's a problem.
It's a problem, yeah.
Okay.
And the courts are there to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So the study guide also highlights Section 39 of the Constitution.
Section 39.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all about interpreting the Bill of Rights.
Okay, so why is this so important?
Well, this section basically says that every court, when they're interpreting legislation, must promote the spirit, the purport, and the objects of the Bill of Rights.
Okay.
So it's not just about avoiding conflict.
Right.
It's about actively promoting its values.
Okay, so it's like, it's not just a rule book. It's like
a value system.
It's a value system.
Yeah, okay.
And it talks about this landmark case, SV Makwanian.
Okay.
And in this case, the court really acknowledged how difficult this can be.
Right.
Balance
different rights
and freedoms.
Complicated.
It is, yeah. So they show how the court used those values to make that decision.
Okay, so that's a good example.
Yeah, it's a really important case.
Okay.
The study guide also talks about the concept of a constitutional state.
A constitutional state.
Yeah, so the idea that the Constitution is the foundation
right.
for everything.
For everything.
Yeah, it's not just a list of rules.
Right, it's like the
blueprint
yeah.
for how our society is meant to function.
Wow.
And we talked earlier about reading down legislation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So where courts try to interpret a law to make it consistent.
Right, with the Constitution.
So they're kind of like
trying to save it.
Saving it.
Yeah.
Instead of striking it down.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then it goes on to talk about foreign and international law being used when we interpret the Bill of Rights.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's because South Africa is part of a global community.
Right, we're not an island.
We're not an island, exactly.
Okay.
But it does caution against just blindly adopting those interpretations.
Yeah.
We need to make sure
it works for us.
It works for us, that it doesn't undermine our own values.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot about language. And this chapter really emphasizes how important it is.
Okay.
You know, we saw how a single word can change
the meaning of the law.
The meaning of the law, But it's not just about individual words. It's about the whole structure.
Right, like the whole, the sentence structure.
Yeah, the grammar, the syntax, the punctuation.
Okay, yeah.
Like even a comma
wow.
can change the meaning.
Yeah, we've learned that
the
hard way.
The study guide gives us some really interesting examples.
Okay.
So one of them is about interpreting lists in statutes.
Okay.
So for example, imagine a law that says you can't possess weapons, firearms, explosives, and other dangerous objects.
Okay.
Now the question is, does that include a kitchen knife?
A kitchen knife?
Yeah.
I mean, it can be dangerous?
It can be dangerous, yeah.
But is it what the law intended?
Exactly. So it reminds us of that rule, iusdem generis.
Iusdem generis.
Yeah, remember that one?
Yeah.
So
it has to be like the other things on the list.
Exactly. It has to fit that pattern.
Okay, so a kitchen knife, probably not.
Probably not, no.
Unless you're using it as a weapon, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. That's a different story.
We're not going to get into
We're not going to get into that, no.
Okay, cool.
So all of this attention to detail isn't just a technicality.
Right.
It's about fairness.
Okay.
It's about making sure that the law is applied consistently.
Right, consistently and fairly.
Yeah, because if we're not clear, then,
it's a problem.
It can lead to injustice.
Right.
And it all comes back to that idea of context.
Context, yeah. I feel like we keep, circling back to context.
We do, yeah.
It's
really important.
Really important.
Yeah.
So, language doesn't exist in a vacuum?
No, it doesn't.
You have to look at...
We have to understand the bigger picture.
The bigger picture, yeah.
What was happening in society at the time? What was the problem they were trying to solve?
Okay, so it's like we said earlier, it's like reading a historical document.
Exactly.
You can't just read the words. You have to understand...
The context, the background.
The background, yeah. Wow. Okay, so how do we even figure out what context is relevant?
But that's where skilled lawyers and judges come in.
Yeah.
They look at legislative history, the social and political climate. Sometimes they'll consult experts.
Wow, so it's like a whole, research project.
It can be, yeah.
Just to understand the law?
Yeah, it's not just about the law itself. It's about everything.
It's about everything.
Surrounding it.
Wow, okay, I am mind blown.
Yeah.
By all of this.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. And I also feel like we've been talking about this in the context of South Africa.
Specifically.
I feel like
these principles
could apply anywhere.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Because law is everywhere.
Everywhere.
And it affects all of us.
It does, yeah.
So, even if you're not a lawyer or a judge...
It's important to understand these things.
It's important to understand this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been...
a real journey.
It has been a journey, this deep dive into statutory interpretation.
Absolutely.
In South Africa.
Yeah.
But, like we say, it could apply...
to other places
as well.
Yeah.
So keep diving.
Keep learning, very questioning.
Keep questioning everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For guiding us through this.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Deep divers.
Deep divers. In play.